Well, welcome to the program, everyone. On the day Adolf Hitler and the European Union suddenly became parallel pals in a politician's take on history. Now, the former mayor of London, the most outspoken proponent of Britain leaving the European Union, and the man who would like to become Britain's next prime minister, Boris Johnson, he's played the Hitler card in the Brexit debate. In an interview published Sunday with the British newspaper The Telegraph, Johnson is quoted as saying, "The past 2,000 years of European history have been characterized by repeated attempts to unify Europe under a single government in order to recover the continent's golden age under the Romans. Napoleon, Hitler, various people tried this, and it ends tragically," unquote. I'm joined in the studio now by David Charter. He is the Times bureau chief here in Berlin. It's good to have you back on the show. Let me just, let everyone know, for full disclosure, we tried numerous times today to reach Boris Johnson, and we invited him to be on the day. I even sent him a personal tweet inviting him to be on the show to hear more from him. We did not get an answer. So let me ask you, David, is the Brexit now reduced basically to the question, what would Hitler do?
Well, first, let me say that's very rude of Boris, and I'm very pleased to be here tonight. We can see the serious point, perhaps, that Boris was trying to make. Let's just think about that for a minute.
Okay, that is?
Perhaps that the EU is trying to force the countries of Europe into some kind of superstate. But the suggestion, invoking Hitler in this, that it's some kind of forcible plot to overrun the peoples of Europe and destroy not only their identities, but to create some kind of twisted ideological racial purity, is obscene to many listeners. And I think Boris has taken the debate to an even lower level than it was already at.
Well, historically, it's not correct. It's not true.
It's not true historically because it was an attempt to create an empire on a certain racial and ethnic basis.
And to conquer countries, right?
As Robert Harris, the historian, said today in a very appropriate tweet, he missed the bit where the Third Reich allowed 1 million non-Aryan refugees to settle under the Nazi regime.
Right. That's a good point. I mean, and you talk about taking this down to, let's say, a very pedestrian level. I want us to listen now to what Boris Johnson also had to say today. And the next comparison, this time the one he pulls out of his wardrobe.
Look at the EU now. It reminds me, it makes me think, as I've just been walking around this wonderful factory, it makes me think of some badly designed undergarment that has now become too tight in some places, far too tight, far too constrictive, and dangerously loose in other places.
I mean, he got a chuckle from the workers there at that plant. But, OK, so now the Brexit is basically a pair of bad-fitting knickers.
Listen, any opportunity that presents itself metaphorically to Boris for a piece of amusing rhetoric is going to be seized by him with both hands. And we've got to see this Hitler comment, of course, in the context of a speech by David Cameron just a few days ago, where he said, do we want to put the peace of the continent, the 70 years of peace that we've had under the European Union at risk, which was portrayed in the tabloid version of the debate as vote to leave the EU, and there will be a third world war.
Okay, right. So, it's either do what we want or you're going to perish, basically. I mean, that's the message, the sub-message. We know that Boris Johnson likes to compare himself with Winston Churchill. And so I did a little research this afternoon. In 1946, Winston Churchill spoke in Zurich about the need, and I'm quoting here, to recreate the European family and provide it with a structure under which it can dwell in peace and safety and in freedom. We must build a kind of United States of Europe. Winston Churchill. Now, what is Boris Johnson up to here?
Well, you've got to bear in mind that Boris feels he is a Winston Churchill expert. He is a biographer of Winston Churchill.
But he's just put Winston Churchill in the same camp as Adolf Hitler.
Boris will, as I say, will not miss an opportunity to make a rhetorical flourish, and he will. And I do think that this shows rather that he, as the figurehead of the Leave campaign, is rather grasping at straws because it's come after a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, of an absolute bombardment of economic claims, economic figures, that Britain will be much worse off if, economically if it leaves the European Union. This has trashed the Leave campaign's possibility to win the argument economically. So they're desperate to move on to, you might suggest, a fear-mongering, but the feeling of insecurity that people have over the mass migration into Europe, which has caused a lot of concern in Britain. That's the territory where the Leave campaign feels strongest.
I also read today that Boris Johnson has not denied writing 2 Telegram columns. I don't know if you're familiar with this. One for staying in the EU, the other against the EU. And he reportedly decided which to send only after the deadline was at hand. So does Boris, what we're seeing here, is this a politician who really even believes what he is saying? I mean, should the voters in Britain, should they be aware this is maybe an opportunist at work?
Well, I would, first of all, I have heard the defence of that, which is that very clever people, when they are trying to present an argument, first of all, try and see all the opposing arguments, and then they write their own speech, their own presentation, based on what they've discovered about the opposing arguments. I don't actually think that was what was happening in this case. I think that you've hit the nail on the head, that Boris has been rather opportunistic. We know that right up until the last moment, he hadn't decided whether to join the Leave campaign or the Remain campaign. And it was even a surprise to David Cameron, allegedly one of his best friends, that he decided to join the Leave campaign. And it's marked out his plan, his goal of replacing David Cameron as Prime Minister.
And, you know, Nigel Farage today saying he supports Boris Johnson now to become the next Prime Minister. All right, we run out of time. Look into your crystal ball. Yes or no, in 5 weeks, Britain will say yes to a Brexit?
No.
No. All right. David Charter, Time Bureau Chief here in Berlin. As always, David, thanks for coming in. We appreciate it.